This is the type of stuff I've been waiting for. Not saying the other zones I did weren't good, but Coldharbour just hits different. I've been playing the Elder Scrolls games since I was 8 years old, and this main questline is what I want from a daedric prince mission. On top of all of that, you've got Dumbledore as the main protagonist, Dr. Octopus as the lead wizard dude, and that history professor from that one season of Community as Molag Bal.
Little slip-up with a co-ed.
There's just so much to talk about with this campaign and questline, I just want to jump right into it. I've been on the quest to 100% complete the Elder Scrolls Online, and Coldharbour marks the last stop on this leg of the journey. We have 100% completed all of the Aldemary Dominion zone guides leading up to this video, and if you'd like to watch them all in chronological order, there is a playlist link in the description. Now, I'm pretty new to this game. I only started playing about 2 months ago, but to my understanding, Coldharbour is kind of a triple dip, because it's the finale for all of the 3 major factions. So understandably, they had to make it an absolute banger. Pretty fat spoiler alert here, more so than my other videos. I understand I'm in the minority trying out ESO for the first time 10 years late, but if you've never done this campaign, it's pretty important to the other stories, and I don't want to ruin your enjoyment. That being said, you've been warned, let's proceed. Usually we start this series with the grind category of each zone. These are things that took a considerable amount of time to complete or posed a significant challenge to me on my quest to 100% complete the zone. Coldharbour took me 24.2 hours to 100% complete, the main story accounting for almost 34% of the time I spent in this zone, but I think that's to be expected with a massive finale. If you're just interested in doing the main story on your own, that took me around 8 hours, but I don't skip dialogue and I talk to more NPCs than you normally need to, so you could definitely do it faster. Points of interest are usually a big time consumer in any of the Elder Scrolls Online zones, and in Coldharbour, it's no different. There are 19 points of interest in this zone, and about 10 of them are completed automatically through the main campaign, so that leaves around 9 for you to do on your own. Each of these major side quests vary in time and complexity. Some take 15 minutes, others will take 45. I strongly recommend doing all of the points of interest before going too far into the main story. There's a couple of missions in the main campaign where you actually get to pick allies to do tasks with, and they won't be there if you haven't helped them in their corresponding missions. I found Coldharbour as a zone completely dead, no pun intended. I get it's 10 years old, there's probably not much reason to come back here, but there were barely any players hanging around. No one was using zone chat, and I almost never came across another player during any of the questing I was doing. This made world bosses extremely tricky. Coldharbour is the first zone I've played where the bosses actually seem to be scaled for groups rather than just 1 or 2 players. I was able to solo 1 of the 6 world bosses on my own, and I sat around twiddling my thumbs for hours waiting for other players to come by to help. I messaged in the zone chat every day for 3 days and no one was around. Luckily, you guys are always willing to help me, and I streamed, we formed a group, and went around doing some of the world bosses. Look at how hard this, how was I supposed to do this on my own? There's 5 people here, including 1 random person. We burned through the Vault of Madness dungeon bosses faster than this guy. Even with 4 to 5 people, some of these world bosses still took quite a bit of effort to take down, and they would have been impossible for me to do with my current gear. Speaking of gear, let's talk about it. I have a self-imposed challenge where I strip myself naked to increase the difficulty of overland content. I remove all gear and gold from my character when starting a new zone, and I have to scavenge for new equipment every time. Thankfully for me, the main campaign, at least the first mission, used to be ESO's main tutorial way back when I tried the game for the first time in 2015-ish. They didn't really change anything, so it's still new player friendly for finding items. I guess back in the day, this was to ensure new players could pick up any weapon and any gear they wanted, so there's a bunch of gear lying around in the first mission. It's not good, but it's better than nothing. As you progress through the main campaign, you tend to get rewards for completing quests, and mobs can sometimes drop decent items, but you're going to get most of your set items once you actually get to the Coldharbour zone. As with most zones, there's 3 overland item sets. The best for my Arcanist was honestly a tie between Prisoner's Rags and the Stygian armor set. The 5-piece bonus for either of these wasn't super helpful to me in particular, but one had decent stamina bonuses and the other had good damage. Meridia's Blessed Armor is the final set, and it's your typical tank set. Not bad if you don't have anything better to wear, but not ideal for a DPS character. After running the Coldharbour dungeon, Vaults of Madness, I was able to put together 5 pieces of the Rattle Cage set. This gives you a boatload of damage and 20% increased weapon and spell damage at all times. For most of the zone, I was not using the dungeon gear, but for the final 30 to 20% I did, and I just wanted to point out how cool that item set is. Fishing was also a nightmare in the zone. It took me over 5 hours to catch all the fish. Usually it only takes me 2 or 3. All the fish you need to catch are foul fish, which is unique. Normally there's a mix, but the rare fish almost never drop. It was really hard. Lore-wise, Azure Plasm is supposed to be uninhabitable by most fish because it's where the daedra actually reform and respawn. So maybe there's a hidden mechanic or something where fishing is just harder, because there's a lot of other people online who have also said it's really hard to get all the fish in Coldharbour. Alright, with all the grindy stuff out of the way, let's talk about the main story of this colossal campaign. Usually before we jump into the summary, we take a look at the notable characters each story has to offer to refresh everyone's memory. Let's take a look at the 5 companions, and start with the 2 I think are the least notable, Lyris and Sai. Lyris is a half-giant warrior from Skyrim. Her primary importance derives from her interactions with you, the player, and how you two adventure all around trying to free all the other companions. She is important to the story, just not as much as some of the other main characters. Sai is in a similar boat, but I would actually argue even less important. Without a doubt, Sai has the least amount of screen time of any of the 5 companions, even less than Cadwell. He's an important character mainly because he's the only person alive who knows where the Amulet of Kings is being hidden, but he's even more surface level than Lyris. He's just a typical honorable knight. Abner Tharn is one of the more complex characters of the 5 companions. He was the Grand Chancellor of Cyrodiil and the Emperor's right hand during his reign. You can never really tell if he's good or bad. He's much more morally ambiguous. He clearly has his own agenda and sneaks off with the Amulet of Kings at the end of the story, but he's also quite helpful in taking down the Daedric Prince and is essential to your success in the main story. I'd argue he's more good than bad, but his story is left on a negative note, so I'm not sure where that'll take us. The Prophet, or Varen Aquilarius, is the former Emperor of Cyrodiil. During his reign, Menimarco tricked him into using the Amulet of Kings to persuade Akatosh to make him Dragonborn. During the ritual, Menimarco changed the spell in order to trigger what we refer to as the Soul Burst. Varen disappeared, and since his throne was now empty, it launched Tamriel into chaos, leading to the Alliance War that currently takes place in-game. Menimarco as well is obviously one of the primary antagonists of this story arc, one of the original 5 companions, an extremely powerful necromancer that serves Molag Bal. Now underneath the surface, he actually plans to betray Molag Bal and harvest his soul to transcend himself to godhood with the help of the Amulet of Kings. So let's touch on those 2 major plot points real quick. The Amulet of Kings is generally worn by whoever currently rules Cyrodiil. The amulet was forged by Akatosh as a covenant between the god and mortals. The amulet keeps the veil between Nirn and Oblivion intact. At its center is a massive red diamond, a unique and powerful soul gem of Ayleid origin. Menimarco plans to use the Amulet of King's special red soul gem to steal Molag Bal's soul, or at least a portion of it, and absorb that power himself. The Soul Burst, or Menimarco's betrayal, damaged the Amulet of Kings in a way that it severed the previous veil between Nirn and Oblivion, allowing Molag Bal to initiate the Plane Meld. The Soul Burst is also described in books as a catalyst that drove many mages or other magicka-sensitive beings insane. Necromancy became far easier to accomplish on massive scales, and there was a large increase of ghosts and wraiths wandering aimlessly around Tamriel. Finally, let's talk about the big, bad Molag Bal, the Daedric Prince of domination and schemes. His ultimate desire is to harvest the souls of all mortals, and plans to achieve this with his Plane Meld. Although he's without a doubt the biggest antagonist in the story, he doesn't really interact with you personally much at all, which I like. Until the end of the story, you're just a mosquito on his back. A minor annoyance, but you're not worth the prince's time directly to confront. It's not until you ally yourself with Meridia, the Daedric Prince of Life and Light, does he start to pay attention to you. I could sit around all day talking about these two princes alone and how much lore there is about them, but an interesting popular theory is that these two were once married or in a relationship. They bicker like an old divorced couple. Both of these princes have gotten their hands dirty with slavery on a mass scale at one point or another in the lore, and although Meridia isn't the worst daedric prince, she's definitely not good overall. Molag Bal has also done some horrendously evil things to other princes or mortals, and you don't often see him do that or that level of villainy when he's interacting with Meridia. Just an interesting fan theory I knew about before going into this story, and some of the dialogue between them actually reminded me of it. Now, this is the finale, so of course there's more important characters during the story arc than most others. Vanus Galarian, the last Ayleid king, Cadwell, and so much more. There's too many important characters for me to name, but if they pop up in the story summary, I'll try and do my best to give a little background on them, but I try to keep the summary portions short, and there's absolutely going to be missing information. I'm trying to cram like 8 hours of content into 5 minutes. So before we jump into the main campaign summary, I'd like to give a huge shout out to my members. Making these videos take anywhere between 30 and 50 hours of recording, editing, script writing, voicing, and researching. Becoming a member is completely optional, so I appreciate it even more. If you're enjoying this video so far and you want to stick with me on my journey through the Elder Scrolls, make sure to subscribe and maybe even drop a like while you're down there. Thank you for your consideration and support. That's all I can really ask of you. Let's get back to the video. You start the main quest by speaking to a very normal and unsuspicious lady who says her benefactor is waiting to meet you. You go to speak with this benefactor and are knocked unconscious. I didn't even know ESO had cutscenes, but one begins to play about Menimarco killing you and absorbing your soul into a soul gem. You wake up in the Wailing Prison, where Molag Bal processes souls before enslavement. There seems to be a prison break going on, and another prisoner, Lyris, helps you escape. After poking some eyeballs and getting directions from a crazy old man, you find your way to the Prophet's cell, the only man Lyris thinks can save you. To free him, you must swap his spirit with your new friend Lyris's and escape through a dark anchor back to Tamriel. Once safely back home, the Prophet tells you about the 5 companions and the betrayal of Varen Aquilarius, the most recent Emperor of Cyrodiil, by the hands of Menimarco, Molag Bal's right-hand lackey. The Prophet also explains the Soul Burst and why this event has allowed Molag Bal to begin his plane meld of Nirn and Oblivion. After the history lesson, you mount a heist to rescue Lyris, your friend you made back in the Wailing Prison. On your way out, you encounter another one of the 5 original companions, Abner Tharn. He's been working with Menimarco and Molag Bal for over 2 years, but he offers to help you under the condition you help him leave Coldharbour as well. Lyris still sees him as a traitor to the Emperor, and you move on with your original escape plan. Just as you and Lyris are about to escape, she discovers another one of the 5 companions, Sai Sahan, is being tortured for the location of the Amulet of Kings. Sai Sahan has been tortured for almost 2 years straight and still hasn't given up the location. Saving him now becomes priority 1. After doing some investigative work, you discover Abner Tharn may not be lying. He seems to be pretending to serve Molag Bal, but also knows the location of Sai Sahan. The Prophet proposes another rescue mission for Tharn against Lyris's protests. On your rescue mission for Tharn, he spills the beans that his boss, Menimarco, actually plans to out-scheme the God of Schemes, and wants the Amulet of Kings to harvest the soul of his boss, Molag Bal. Lots of scheming going on between these 3, Tharn, Menimarco, Molag Bal, so I don't blame you if you get lost. Menimarco summons some skeletons to try and thwart your escape with Tharn, but you're able to get away. After the Prophet and Abner did some research, they've located Sai Sahan in the Halls of Torment, basically Molag Bal's largest torture chamber. You must kill Sai Sahan's torturer and overcome several challenges, but you're able to escape with him successfully. If you're keeping count, in 6 quests, that is the 4th rescue mission we've completed. Sai Sahan remembers where he hid the amulet and where he hid the key, the Valley of Blades. This is where Sai Sahan trained as a young boy, and as you approach this area, you discover it's completely in ruin due to a massive freaking titan flying around, which of course, in classic Elder Scrolls fashion, you must dispose of. After killing the titan, you advance into the inner chamber to collect the key needed to get the Amulet of Kings. Now that you have the key, you travel to Sancretor, the chamber housing the Amulet of Kings. Menimarco has followed you to Sancretor. Unfortunately for him, so has Molag Bal. After removing an enchantment to get the Amulet of Kings, Molag Bal is able to hear firsthand Marco's scheme to enslave the Lord of Brutality, and he's, not happy about it. Molag Bal sucks Marco back to Coldharbour to torture for eternity. You snag the Amulet of Kings and retreat back to your base of operations in Tamriel. The final step of the 5 Companions' plan is to halt the Plane Meld and organize an attack against Molag Bal in his domain of Coldharbour. Now this is easier said than done. You spend the second half of the story trying to accomplish this feat with the help of the Mages Guild and the Fighters Guild. Quick intermission before we jump into the second half of the story. I'm about to majorly gloss over the Fighters and Mages Guild questlines. They're technically part of the main campaign and they take roughly 2 hours to do each, but they're not super important. You'll recognize a few repeating characters, maybe, but the most important thing accomplished in either faction is the final quest for the Fighters Guild, where you destroy the Mortem Vivicus. It's basically a nuclear bomb created by Molag Bal, and it's powered by hundreds of thousands of souls. You're able to destroy it, and from what we can tell from talking to NPCs and scattered letters and books, it tremendously weakened the Dark Prince's power. Alright, let's get into the second half of the story, the actual assault on Coldharbour. When you first enter this plane of oblivion, you emerge inside the Hollow City and are greeted by the groundskeeper. This woman explains that she's the caretaker of the city and is protected by Meridia, the Prince of Life and Light. Your objective is to gather your forces from the surrounding areas and send them back to the city, as it's a safe haven protected against Molag Bal. The first person you save is Vanus Galarian, a powerful mage who leads the Mages Guild. He thought he could solo destroy the Great Shackle, which is basically the largest anchor mooring, but he got caught by the Daedra. You rescue him and destroy the shackle. The second major person you need to rescue is King Laelorian Dinar, the last living alien trapped inside of one of Molag Bal's chambers, stuck there for almost 2,000 years. After his rescue, he assumes command of the Fighters Guild forces of Coldharbour and aids you in your assault. You meet with all of the major leaders of your army and set out to begin your attack on Molag Bal. There's several key strategic locations that you need to secure, and I'll just brush over them very quickly. The first thing you need to do is secure the chasm, and this is protected by Molag Bal's daughter, Molag Grunda. You need to deal with a large clan of enslaved vampires, either eliminate them or ally with them, the choice is yours. And finally, you need to storm the Citadel with your allies to reach the Endless Stair. Once you've reached the Endless Stair, Meridia presents herself to you for the first time instead of her alter ego, the Groundskeeper. Now that you're directly in Molag Bal's front lawn, Meridia is able to provide some protection as you make your way through the Planar Vortex. The Planar Vortex is the staging ground Molag Bal uses to intersect space and time to eventually meld Nirn with Coldharbour. You basically need to destroy some dark anchors to destabilize Molag Bal's grip on the Planar Vortex. Molag Bal is of course furious and launches a direct attack on you, Meridia, and the other fighters in Mages Guild who attended you. After activating the Light of Meridia, a crystal of pure light to sever the connection of Molag Bal and the Planar Vortex, you successfully stop the plane meld and save Nirn. Now the story isn't quite over yet. Marco stole your soul at the beginning, remember? The 5 companions and you plan to retrieve your soul along with the hundreds of thousands of others by launching a direct attack against Molag Bal himself, not just Coldharbour. To do this, we need to use the Amulet of Kings to give the player godlike powers so they're strong enough for the battle. Unfortunately, this requires the soul of another person, either the Prophet, Lyris, or Sai-Sahan. After you make your choice on who you want to sacrifice, you are bestowed the power of the Amulet of Kings. You can one-shot almost any enemy, and you begin your attack on Molag Bal. You use the amulet to shrink him down and commence a battle to the death. You and Molag Bal are simultaneously defeated, but Meridia scoops up your soul just as it leaves Molag Bal's clutches.
You have bested me and released 1,000 times 1,000 souls back into the Mundus. For the moment, your world is spared.
The veil between Oblivion and Nirn has been repaired. Our world is finally safe. For now. So yeah, obviously, if you've seen the episodes before this one, I can usually complete these summaries in about 3 minutes or less, but this one was way longer and way more complex. Still, I tried to shorten it as best as I could. If you want the full 8-hour experience, you're gonna have to jump into the game and get it yourself. But now that we're done with the main story summary, let's actually analyze it. If you're unfamiliar with this series, I tend to give a zone a ranking out of 5. Usually there's 3 categories: the main story, the environment and design, and finally, the side content. Let's start with the main story analysis now that it's fresh in our minds. I'm not going to go crazy in depth because we just went over the recap, but I've only been playing base game content up to now, and this blew everything I've done out of the water. I think this is the first base game zone I'd give 5 out of 5 stars in regards to the main story. Just for clarity's sake, I judge base game content and DLC stuff at different standards. Obviously, one's essentially free while the other requires payment, so they can't really be ranked together. However, Coldharbour is base game, and the story was incredible. Coming from Skyrim and Oblivion, Molag Bal is basically your standard evil demon guy. I never really thought much about him as a daedric prince. You think of Mehrunes Dagon, right, who's also Prince of Domination and has also launched several invasions into Nirn, and as a character, Dagon is much more complex and interesting than Molag Bal. His ambitions are never just domination for the sake of being evil. In the single-player games, Molag Bal just kinda wants you to mess with people, almost like a kid making 2 ants fight to the death over a piece of bread. He of course has interesting lore about him if you dig around, but at least in the single-player games I've played, he was decently one-dimensional. That being said, I think the Elder Scrolls Online did a fantastic job adding a little more character and depth to this daedric prince. So maybe instead of being a one-dimensional character in my mind, Molag Bal's been promoted to 2-dimensional. Nothing he ever does should surprise you, if you get my drift. Just assume Molag Bal is going to do the most evil thing possible in any given scenario, and you're basically on your way of understanding this guy. There's also the concept of defeating a daedric prince as immortal. I find just a little off-putting, only because of how much of a lore nerd I am. I understand we didn't kill Molag Bal in this story, right? We basically wounded him so severely that he's gonna need like 1,000 years to recover. But that still feels weird. To me, it would have made more sense if we performed Many Marco's original planned ritual to steal a portion of Molag Bal's essence with the Amulet of Kings. That could have solved the plane meld, not directly defeated the prince, but still wounded him greatly, and the Amulet of Kings would remain functional for Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion. If you didn't know, in Oblivion, Martin Septim destroys the Amulet of Kings to defeat Mehrunes Dagon, literally transforming into the avatar of Akatosh. But in ESO, to defeat Molag Bal, we just had to use some of its power, and it's still fully intact. I'd have to do more research on that before I could fully understand. Maybe Molag Bal is just straight up weaker than Dagon. We did lay siege to Coldharbour beforehand, so maybe that weakened him a lot somehow. I don't know. It's the only plot hole I can think of. Other than that, though, this story was phenomenal. The best I've done in ESO so far, without a shadow of a doubt. The voice acting was on another level too. Normally you hear repeat voice actors during main campaigns, but I don't think there were any in this one. It was by far the longest and had the most amount of characters. There's also a lot of impactful decisions you can make that shape the rest of the story. There's a clan of wood elves and snake people, and you need to pick one of those factions to help. Whoever you help will assist you in your final siege. Similar story with the vampire clan a bit later. You can decide to free Many Marco or not when you find him in Molag Bal's torture chamber. You also have to choose who to sacrifice to the Amulet of Kings. The list goes on. Before you jump on my nuts, okay, yes, I chose to sacrifice Lyris, but I did this because I wanted to see if the decision was actually real or not, okay? Lyris is in a bunch of promo material and trailers for ESO, specifically the Greymoor chapter, so I wanted to see if she's actually dead, and that'll influence the story, or if she's just gonna pop up randomly somewhere with no explanation. Believe me, there is a method to my madness. Okay, let's talk about the zone design of the main campaign. This portion is split into 2 parts, the actual physical environment and the design of the zone overall. I think I'd give Coldharbour 3 stars in this category. The developers for the Elder Scrolls Online took a very different approach in designing Coldharbour compared to what we can read about it in Oblivion or Skyrim. In my 1,000 hours or so of playing Skyrim, I've probably read most books in that game at least once, and the title I'm referring to is actually called The Doors of Oblivion. Coldharbour is described as a sludgy mud pit with freezing temperatures and a sky completely on fire. Clearly, the developers took it in a different direction, but I kinda like it. The Coldharbour in ESO is much more jarring, if that's the right word. There's spikes, huge shards of obsidian, stacks of soul gems, skeletons, dead trees, and azure pools of something. Coldharbour in ESO feels a lot more like an industrial slave encampment, which fits thematically better with Molag Bal's objectives in this main campaign compared to a massive mud pit, at least in my opinion. Coldharbour is also described in the lore as a corrupted reflection of Nirn, which they did a good job with. You can see peoples, architecture, and civilizations from the past. It's almost like a mini time capsule of Tamriel, which brings me to my next point. It's supposed to be a reflection of Nirn, not just Tamriel. I understand from a game development perspective, it's easier to reuse assets, so I'll give examples of things that exist in ESO that would have been cool to see in Coldharbour. The Malmer, or Sea Elves. The race of elves is present in the Aldemary Dominion storyline and already exist asset-wise. They come from the kingdom of Pyendania, which isn't technically in Tamriel, but it would have been cool to see them and maybe some of their architecture. We do get some Dwemer ruins, but it would have been cool to see a better preserved area, maybe being investigated by the Mages Guild with some cool lore and world building. I'm not asking to meet a Dwemer, just something more time capsule-esque. Maybe something to do with Lorcan, that would have been cool. Now, to their credit, we do get to interact with the last Ayleid king, which is phenomenal. Again, still in Tamriel, not really the wider world of Nirn, but I have to give them props for that. As a lore junkie, that shit was amazing. I loved it. Now, to address the second part of this category, the actual physical design of Coldharbour, this is mainly why the category gets 3 stars. It's unique in the sense that it's clearly designed to do the main story in. There is one functional city and 3 segments around it, north, east, and west. The northern portion is completely locked off until you progress far enough in the campaign. You also can't get to any other segment without going through the main city. If you're in the western portion, you must pass through the Hollow City to get to the eastern portion. It's like Grotwood and the city of Eldenroot, but worse, since it removes a lot of the open world experience. I really dislike using fast travel, but it's basically mandatory in this zone. Coldharbour really does not have the same open world experience as any of the other overland zones I've 100% completed so far. The Hollow City is also a bit tricky to navigate since it has multiple levels going up and down. This is the first time I wish I had a minimap because there are 6 entrances and exits to the city, and it was tricky for me to tell which paths to follow and exit every time I wanted to. The design portion is going to be the biggest criticism of the entire video. I really like the open world feeling ESO brings to the table most of the time, and I just wasn't feeling it in this zone. Okay, final category. Let's talk about the side content and all the interesting things scattered around the world that most people skip through. I'm gonna have to give the side content 4 stars. It was really good. After completing the main story, there's only 9 or 10 points of interest you have to do on your own. 2 of them were absolute stinkers, Towers of Lies and Spurned Peak, basically just glorified fetch quests, but the other 8 were really good. To shout out some of my favorites, the Vile Laboratory was really cool and added an interesting layer of complexity to Molag Bal. It adds the complex features of the Daedric Prince being patient, calculating, and interested in experiments. Basically, 2 members of the Mages Guild get fused together with a mix of Daedric and Dwemer technology. The Vile Laboratory also has some cool lore around it where you discover this is actually where Molag Bal made the Zivkin, another mashup of 2 different species, the Dremora and the Zivili. I'm not going to spoil the overall story, but you do get to become a monkey, so that's cause for celebration, I feel. The Cliffs of Failure was super interesting, mainly because you get to interact with High Kin Lady Estray one more time. You know, the main villain from the first Aldemary Dominion zone. Now, I was under the impression that she actually served Mehrunes Dagon, not Molag Bal. The final boss battle with her is in fact in the Deadlands, but there's an interesting trail of letters between her and Meni Marco where he basically convinces her to abandon Dagon and join his master, Molag Bal. Anyway, basically, it's a Hunger Games style battle royale between the 3 champions, Estray being one of them, and I assume the other 2 are from the other factions, and they have Mages Guild pets in the arena below battling on their behalf. I chose to side with Estray just because the other 2 villains I assume are from other factions and they didn't really talk to me at all. They just had like 1 line of dialogue. Estray had a lot more. She remembered me and she definitely still hated me, but ultimately I chose to free all the mages at the end, not her. The Manor of Revelry was also really cool too. You're transported to what I assume is a corrupted reflection of somewhere in Hammerfell. There's a dude Stibbins in there, and he seemed to remember me, but I definitely don't remember him from anything I did. Anyway, he's trapped in this luxurious fantasy prison because his jailers prefer to kill their prey when they least expect it and when they're happy. You also encounter the hottest daedra I've ever seen in my life. God damn. Anyway, this story is a little more humorous, which I enjoyed, but it's a massive, well-detailed area and showcased some architecture I'm not familiar with, so I really liked how it looked. Speaking of architecture, Haj Uxith, which I definitely said wrong, was also my first taste of Argonian culture and architecture in this game so far, and it looked really cool. Granted, the histories and temples were corrupted and damaged, but it was still cool to interact with my people for the first time, you know? The story itself is not as fantastic as the others. Molag Bal essentially has a deal with these Argonians that he'll keep them safe as long as they tend to their history, which he farms for sap for potions or something. You're asked to help shut down the hist sap production and decide if the history should continue to suffer or be killed. An interesting choice and a pretty decent story overall. The public dungeon in Coldharbour is also really interesting. The layout is quite complex and there's these crazy portals and stuff you need to go through. The story itself is okay. Basically, 3 groups of people from Tamriel got pulled into Coldharbour and you need to assist each one with regaining their souls or something. To do this, you need to kill yourself at the end of the dungeon, which is a pretty interesting twist. I don't really know how that works because we don't have our soul yet, so there's nothing really to sacrifice. But regardless, it's an interesting twist. The dungeon, Vaults of Madness, was amazing. One of the best dungeons I've done yet design-wise. The story is there's essentially 4 architects. One of them was better than the other 3, so the 3 decided to steal and plagiarize his plans, which drove him into madness. This drove the mad architect to reach out to the daedra, who offered him the souls of the people who plagiarized his work if he became Molag Bal's personal architect. He accepted the deal and is credited as the creator of the Planar Vortex and the Endless Stair, 2 of the most important tools from Molag Bal's plane meld. Anyway, really cool dungeon. You work with the 3 thieves and you try and help them escape from the mad architect's eternal suffering, even though some of them actually think their punishment is justified. Man, overall, I think I'd have to give Coldharbour a fantastic 4.5 out of 5-star ranking overall. Probably the best base game content I've done so far. The biggest issue for me was the physical zone design itself. I didn't enjoy being locked into 30% of the map at a time, but the story content and the side content were phenomenal. Besides Sheogorath, this is the first time in ESO that we've come face to face with not 1, but 2 daedric princes. I really hope our relationship with Meridia carries forward and she remembers us throughout the story. My hopes aren't high for that, but it'd be cool. After speaking to Cadwell during the conclusion, he offered me the option to undertake his silver challenge, which threw me into Bleakrock Isle, which I think is the Ebonheart Pack storyline. So for all of you following the series wondering what I'm gonna do next, the next video you see will be on the Orsinium DLC. Don't worry, I've read your comments. I'll make sure to do the prologue before jumping into any of the other content. Depending on how much I like that standalone DLC content, I may decide to do another before jumping into the packed main storyline. That's to be decided. Base game zones generally take me 30 to 40 hours for one video, and I assume DLC zones will take longer to do, so maybe I won't be up to the task of that increased workload. We'll see. Regardless, this is the grand conclusion of my first leg of the Elder Scrolls Online base game. We've truly 100% complete one of the 3 factions along with the main campaign. I've been thoroughly enjoying my experience so far, and I have no plans to stop. I want to take a second to really thank you all for your support. These videos wouldn't be possible without you guys watching. And we're almost at 10,000 subscribers in 2 months. What a wild achievement. I can't believe it. Thank you so much. With that being said, I can't wait to check out Hrothgar, and I'll see you in the next one.